Hello everyone, we've done Archer, we've done Warrior, there was only one class left to do and that is Mage. So in this video we're going to complete the series and do the Mage edition. We're going to look at all of Mage's skills, we're going to see which one is the best, we're going to rank them. Only problem is that Fireball is not at rank 6, it will be at rank 5 for this video because we're just really unlucky. But apart from that, all the other skills are at rank 6 and let's get on with the video. The first skill we're going to be looking at is Fireball, which is the default skill that you are given when you start the game. Now, one advantage of Fireball is that it gives Mage some range. Mage range. Anyways, this is useful because out of the three classes, I would say that Mage is the least defensive when you start the game. And so you kind of want to be able to keep enemies away from you and hit them from further away out. And with Fireball, you're able to do this. Another advantage of Fireball is the ability to ghost and the ability to explode more than once. So it can hit an enemy, explode, move on, hit another one, explode, and so on, which is obviously quite nice because it makes the skill more efficient. The final advantage of Fireball is the fact that it has the ability to give enemies conditions. For example, it can reduce movement speed, and if you upgrade it to rank 6, which I failed to do, then it can inflict burn, which obviously does more damage to the enemy and making this skill more efficient. There's no real weaknesses with Mage. I think the only thing you could say is that it's not much of a killing machine compared to the other skills that Mage has, and it's also not the only ranged weapon. But even then, I still think it's a very simple and effective skill, so I think Fireball gets a 6 out of 10. Now we're going to be looking at Chain Lightning. Now, one advantage of Chain Lightning is, as the name suggests, you can do damage in a chain, so you can actually target more than one enemy at once. This is quite nice because if you're bombarded with lots of enemies, you can actually do quite a lot of damage because you're targeting and killing a larger group of enemies at the same time. Another advantage of Chain Lightning is that it targets the closest enemy to you. This is actually really nice because it means that even if you have your back turned to the enemy, it will still target it. So this is great for Bridge of Stagnation because instead of having to flip around if you're in the middle trying to hit enemies, you can stay completely still and just have your finger and Chain Lightning and it will do the rest for you. It also has the ability to paralyze and stun if you upgrade it to rank 6, making it a great defensive skill because it keeps enemies away from you. And it also has a low cooldown speed, so you can spam it. Finally, Chain Lightning has the ability to work through walls and objects. This is quite useful because if there's an enemy on the other side of a barrier and it's really close and you can see it, you could probably target it and kill it, which makes this skill really, really nice. This is great for Ancient Fortress because there's like a barrier thing that you have to jump off, but you can actually kill the enemies below using Chain Lightning. And it's also great for the chest room in Ancient Fortress as well, because it's probably the fastest way you can open all the chests at once. Now, before I talk about any disadvantages, I need to explain something. So, in the Warrior edition of this video, I talked about a certain skill called Berserker mode. And Berserker mode gives you 100% control resistance. Now, some of the enemies have this as well. I know the bats have it, I know some of the knights have it, I know there's a warrior enemy that has it as well. This is important because this is going to come up again and again and again. For Chain Lightning, stun and paralyze will not work if you use it on an enemy that has Berserker mode, which is obviously a huge disadvantage. To conclude, I'm going to give this a 7.5 to 8 out of 10 because I think the ability to work through walls and the ability to target more than one enemy at once is very useful. Because of its low cooldown speed and its relatively low mana, even though for a mage mana shouldn't be a problem, you can actually use it as your main attack instead of Fireball. So in that sense, it's also quite useful as well. Next, we're going to be looking at Meteor. Now, one advantage of Meteor is that it is a killing machine. It does a lot of damage, and this damage is increased by the fact that it inflicts burn, and this burn does a lot of damage as well, which obviously makes it more potent. It's also a great defensive skill because it can knock enemies back and also stuns them for a short period of time as well, which obviously is another advantage. Now, another great thing about Meteor is that if you place an enemy in a specific spot and you have a high enough skill recovery, you can effectively trap them in a single spot, which is obviously great for both attack and defense. Attack because you can place quite a lot of burn on them, which obviously kills them quicker, but also great defensively because they can't move, they can't attack you back. Now, one slight disadvantage of this skill is that it can be a bit fiddly to aim sometimes. I know it's not a huge problem, but like when I first started playing Mage, I remember when I was using Meteor, I kept missing, which is kind of embarrassing. It's also kind of hard to aim when you're moving, so you kind of want to be stationary, which again isn't ideal. Another obvious disadvantage is the fact that once again, Berserker mode, if an enemy has Berserker mode, the stun, the knockback doesn't work. So overall, I'd probably give Meteor an 8 out of 10 because in terms of damage, it's probably your best skill. It's also a great defensive skill in terms of knocking, enemies back and giving them burn and stun, which is obviously quite nice as well. Now we're going to be looking at Stormcall. Now, just like Meteor, one advantage of this is that it does a lot of damage. It's a killing machine, which is obviously very beneficial. Another advantage of this is that it works on both sides. So when it does its like lightning thing, it covers all of you and both sides of you, which is obviously great for like Bridge of Stagnation because let's say you're surrounded on both sides by enemies. You don't have to pick a side and you don't have to aim. You can just use the skill and then it will target multiple enemies at once on both sides of you. Like a lot of other mage skills, it's also great at like stun, paralyzing. It's also got a reduction of attack speed and defense speed on enemies if hit, which is obviously also nice as well. Once again, the main problem with Stormcall is the fact that the stun, the paralyzing, the reduction in attack and movement speed will not work if the enemy has Berserker mode on. I would also give this an 8 out of 10 because I think that obviously it does a lot of damage, but also if you're surrounded, like in Bridge of Stagnation, or you're ambushed, then this could get you out of trouble. Now let's take a look at Magma Burst. Now, one advantage of Magma Burst is its ability to stun, which is increased by the fact that it has multiple projectiles that shoot into the air and shower all around you. This is obviously useful because let's say you're in Bridge of Stagnation where you're surrounded by both sides, you can use this to stun multiple enemies at once, which allow you to better defend yourself against damage. Now, the biggest disadvantage is the fact that it doesn't work on enemies with Berserker mode on. Obviously, this is a huge problem because the whole point of Magma Burst is to stun your enemies. So if your enemies have Berserker mode on, it's completely useless. Another disadvantage of Magma Burst is that it's not necessarily aimed at an enemy specifically, but it's just aimed to explode when it hits the ground. This means if it hits a bit of the map before it hits the enemy, or it hits, an obstacle for example, then it will explode without doing any damage to the enemy, which is obviously a bit of a waste. With all that being said, I would probably give this a 7 out of 10 because it's a great tool to use to stun multiple enemies at once, and it also does a fair bit of damage. However, if you have a group of enemies that have Berserker mode on, it's completely useless. Now the next skill is Water Push, and the main advantage of this is the ability to knock back enemies before they hit you and do damage, so it's a great defensive skill. Again, the obvious disadvantage is the fact that it doesn't work on enemies with Berserker mode on. It's also not very useful against longer range attacks, against archers and stuff. And finally, I just feel like the stun, the knockback, there are other skills that Mage has that do the exact same thing, but also just use better damage as well. So for me, I think this skill gets a 5 out of 10 because it can be useful. The knockback is useful, but there are other skills that do the exact same thing and have extra things on top of it, like more damage or more conditions. Acid Rain is the next skill that we're going to be looking at, and one advantage of Acid Rain is the fact that it can be spammed because there is basically no cooldown. And because it can be spammed and it has the ability to stun and reduce movement and attack speed, you could theoretically repeatedly stun and repeatedly reduce attack and movement speed of an enemy a lot. And of course, this is a great defensive skill because you're stopping enemies from doing damage to you. Now, one disadvantage of Acid Rain is the fact that because of the angle that it shoots out from, it's really hard to hit bats and other flying enemies. Like, it's really hard to do so. So in terms of killing bats and stuff, this is probably not the skill you want to use. And once again, conditions like stun do not work on enemies that have Berserker mode. So overall, I'd give this skill like a 7 out of 10 because it's an alright skill. It does do some damage. It will repeatedly stun and reduce attack and movement speed, which is great defensively, but once again, you probably have better skills to do this. Now, the final skill that we're going to be looking at today and in this entire series is Ball Lightning. And this skill is mainly for paralyzing your enemies. That's its main advantage. And obviously this is great because if they can't move, they can't come and hit you. It also decreases the attack and movement speed, which is also great defensively as well. Ball Lightning is also a good attacking skill because it does a lot of damage on its own, and also enemies that are hit and paralyzed take 50% more damage, meaning that you're able to kill your enemies faster. Yeah, you can probably guess now, it's Berserker mode again. So to conclude, I would probably give this skill a 7 out of 10 because obviously you're able to paralyze your enemy. You can paralyze more than one enemy because it keeps going after hitting one. It has the ability to reduce attack speed and movement speed, and with it you're able to raise the damage that you're able to do to it by 50% as well. So it's a decent skill to have.